What's happening, dogs? Mr. Allen here, and we're about to find the domain, range, and zeros of this radical function that has a quadratic within it. That's how radical it is. It has a quadratic going on inside. Now, when we're talking domain, right, we're talking about what x values can we and can we not plug in. Well, what's like a no-no when it comes to square roots? I can't square root negatives. Can I square root 0? Yes. Can I square root positives? Yes. When we're talking about functions here. So it seems like that 0 is that cutoff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the inside of this radical function. I'm going to set it equal to 0. Now what I can do is I can solve for x. So the plus or minus 16. First off, remember that when you're solving with square roots, you got to have that plus and minus. That tells me that if I were to plug in 16 or negative 16, the inside of that radical would be 0. So square root of 0 is 0. So it still exists there. But either on the outside of that or on the inside of that on this graph, it does not exist. So let's test some values, shall we? If I were to plug in, say, a number between negative 16 and positive 16, like 0, would it work? Well, if I plug in 0 for x here, I'm going to have 256 minus 0. That's fine. Square root of that is just going to be 16. So that's good between there. How about the numbers outside? Well, something outside of positive and negative 16 would be like, say, positive 20. If I plugged in 20 here, I'd get 400 for x squared. 256 minus 400, that's a negative number. And although you can take square roots of a negative and get imaginaries, it's not going to exist on this function on this graph. So that is outside of it. So when we're going to write the domain here, my domain is going to be from negative 16 to positive 16. And why am I including these? Why do I have these brackets here? Well, that's because when I plug in negative 16 or positive 16, it's 0, and I can take the square root of 0. I just can't take the square root of negatives. So, domain, done. Now it's time for the range. Well, my range, I got to think about what the graph of this thing looks like. So if I were to sketch a rough graph here, it looks something like this. I'd have the negative 16 here, and I'd have the positive 16 right here. That high point there is when x equals 0. If I plug in 0 for x, I'm going to get the square root of 256, which is 16. So since my range is talking about my y values, now what I can do is I can think, okay, well, what's my lowest y value? It's 0, right along there, right? It doesn't exist below that. So I'm going to go at 0, and I'm going to include it because I can plug in 16 or negative 16 and get 0 as an output. But the highest I can go up is then to positive 16. When I plug in 0 for x, I get a 16 for my output. So 16 would be my cap for that range, and I would include it because square root of 256 is 16. Dope. Next up, we want to find our zeros. Well, it should actually be pretty clear as to what we have for our zeros. We don't even need to really do a whole lot more. I'm going to have it right here and right here. So my two zeros are going to be negative 16, comma 0 and positive 16, comma 0. That's it. We're done with this one. That's dope.